Good evening, everybody. This is Srija from the team Voyages into the Past or Otit Probaho. Today, Voyages into the Past is honored to have among us Dr. Syed Ali Nadeem Rezavi. He is an eminent professor at Aligarh Muslim University. Recently, he has been the chairman and coordinator of Center for Advanced Studies in History and coordinator of Musa Dakri Museum. His research interests encompasses the fields of history and archaeology of medieval India, with special focus on Mughal history. He has authored several books like Fatehpur Sikri Revisited, History through Archaeology, and many more. He has been the president of the Medieval India section of Indian History Congress in 2013 and 2014 session and General President of UP History Congress in 2018. He was also chosen as the sectional president of Bengal Itihas Sansad in 2019 and Punjab Historical Conference in 2017. Today, he would enlighten us with his lectures on structures as historical documents, understanding the past through architectural remains. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much for inviting me to deliver this lecture. Uh, Structures as historical documents. I chose this theme in order to demonstrate the fact that the study of the past remains, the buildings, the structures, is not only a subject of architecture, it is not a subject which should only be taught in engineering colleges, but is a subject which gives us much information as far as our past is concerned. In fact, what we would be doing today is only a small portion of the way how buildings and structures can be used to understand our past. Structures, by the term structure, you can say, one means anything which has parts arranged together in some fashion. It is something which is built or constructed. For example, your house or a bridge which you cross, or the dam which supplies you with electricity. All these things would form a part of what one means by the term structure. Structure, in other words, is quite different, say, from the Ajanta caves, which are nothing but big sculptures representing a building. A structure is something which has a form, which is made of certain materials. It is something which is physical, but based on an abstract idea. It is something which encompasses space and requires tangible material. For example, stones or bricks or mortar or anything, along with abstract ideas, what shape to be given, how many chambers, what it should look like. And then, of course, the third part, a technology. How to go about using that abstract idea and the building material to give shape to a particular type of structure. So in a way, there are three things which are required for any structure to be formed. An abstract idea, what it should be like. I mean, you might have seen that all of us live in our own houses, but each house, if you're not living in a flat, is different from the other, and each inhabitant finds his own building to be comfortable or not comfortable. I mean, I may be finding my house to be very, comfortable for myself, but if you come and live in that house, it may not be comfortable for you. So everyone has, an abstract idea which is based on the culture and the background of the person who wants to get it constructed. Plus, you need the tangible materials, that is the building material. Say, for example, if you are living in an area which is rocky, you would naturally be building materials out of stones, a place where stones are available. That would be the cheapest material available. If you are living, say, for example, in areas like Kashmir, where you have lot of wood available, I'm not talking about climate at the moment. So you will have, wood through which you will be constructing your houses. And then, of course, the technology which is known during that period, all these three things would interact together to form a particular type of building which you would be using. Your house, for example, would be very different from your college building, so on and so forth. So there is an abstract idea, the utility of why you are building it, the place where you are building it, the climate in which you are building it, and above all, the culture through which that particular building is being resulted into. So, in other words, it requires a need, and a need, depends on many things to give it shape. Your need might be as per your cultural traditions. Your need might be dictated by the, climate in which you are living. Your need might be the geographical location where you are situated, so on and so forth. And then it is given shape by the type of material which are available. Thus, a hut may be derived from an abstract idea, but is reflective of a need for shelter and protection. Uh, its forms depend on the materials as well as technology and tools available to construct it. For example, buildings which are of wood or straw or mud would be very different from the buildings which are built of, say, brick or of a stone. Now, the technology also matters, what type of bricks or tiles you are able to make it. Because to make a brick, a particular kind of a brick, or for example, the type of tiles, most of you belong to Bengal, you must have seen the tile work of, Gaur and Pandwa. So you need a particular type of technology where such decorated tiles can be prepared, or the metal or the technology, how to shape that metal. For example, you need the hinges for the doors, the window sills, and so on and so forth. So a technology is very important, how to create, even the ceilings, the covering, whether as you would be having a building which is striated, whether you have a building which is corbelled, whether it is a building which is, based on true arch and domes, whether you know how to make mortar. We know it very well that in ancient period in India, a very basic type of mortar was generally known. I'm not saying that good mortar was not known, but generally in practice was a mortar which lacked lime in it. Lime mortar, for example, comes into existence only by the time that medieval period starts to set in into India. That would mean that it is around 10th century, 8th to 10th century, that the northernmost parts of the Indian subcontinent, places like Sindh and Punjab, there we start getting lime mortar and bricks, whereas as far as the Indogangetic basin is concerned, it is from 12th century, when these new technologies were imported in India from Central Asia and outside. And along with lime mortar, the plaster, we also start getting, the type of furnaces which are needed to make it. And along with that, the tiling process also sets in. And we find that a large variety of houses and buildings start germinating all over this Indian subcontinent. You need the technique not only to shape and create a brick or shape a polished block or slab of stone, but also how to roof or cover a structure, whether it is a thatched one, is it a vault, a flat roof, a tapering conical shikhara, or a dome. I mean, this type of roofing would depend on number one, the material, and number two, the technology. For example, here in this slide on the upper portion, you find that here how the material is being lifted to the top. That type of technology which you will still encounter in the Indian subcontinent till date. In Europe, on the other hand, we had other type of technologies, and we would see further, if possible, in other slides, how these developments took place. In the lower slide, you find, a dome which is decorated with blue terracotta tiles, and such tiles can only be built if you have the technology of making furnaces which can heat the terracotta to such an extent to give it the glaze, how to mix the bones and other material and the chemicals to result in such beautiful tilings which can then be used to embellish your particular building. Thus, a structure is a full register of human development. I would say that it is one of the best accounts of the historical development. It gives you much idea, not only about the technology which was prevalent, but also the culture which prevailed. It also reveals many registers how the culture and society evolved over a given period of time. Now, for example, let us start with the early architecture in the Indian subcontinent. We are not going into the very early architecture of India. We know that architecture, in fact, proper structures, the term I'm using is a structure, not building, because a building may also be a structure which is carved out of rock. But here, before you, is a structure which belongs to the Gupta period. It is, one of the earliest temples which are there. You can see the learning process where there are very heavy, stone pillars. Such stone pillars actually were not needed for such a structure, but then you can also see how very heavy stone slabs have been used to form the ceilings of the veranda, the circumambulatory path around the Garbhagriha, the central chamber also being covered with a flat trabeated roof. So all this structure at the beginning, from the Gupta period onwards, when we start having temple being constructed in India, we start having generally trabeated buildings and structures which are pillared, colonnaded. On the back side of the slide, you can see the shikharas of the temples, where the corbelling, the same stone slabs, just put in a different way to form a pyramidal roof, were used in the ancient period. Generally speaking, as I said, the arch was not found before the 12th century as far as the Indo-Gangetic area and the other areas of the subcontinent are concerned. Another example where we find that how these flat roofs, the trabeated roofs soon gave shape to the shikharas, tapering rooftops where the corbelled method was used, where tapered stone slabs. And now you can see how heavy these stone slabs are. They do not need any mortar to hold them together. You need carvings on the stones. And what type of carvings are there on the stone? The carvings which depict the religious life and the ethos of the period, the culture of the period. They are depicted on the stones and on the surfaces of the structures which are being constructed. Now, it is only at Bhitargao, the Bhitargao temple at Kanpur, that we find one of the earliest monumental structures in North India which has been built with bricks. Remember that it's only in the Punjab, Multan, and then in the east, the Bengal region, that since the beginning, the bricks were being employed and used. In the other parts of the subcontinent, it was generally the stones which was used as the building material. And naturally, whether it was Punjab or the plains of Punjab or that of Multan or that of Bengal, we know that that was an area where the stones are not very easy to get, and it is much more easier to make bricks. And that is why, that became one of the part of the culture of these regions, dictated by the climate and the atmosphere, that we start getting the brick structures in these particular regions. But then, as I said, that this particular building, Bhitargao, is an exception. It is situated in an area in Uttar Pradesh, where generally most of these structures which were being built were of stone. And it is said that it is here that for the first time, an arch was, found. Now, as you can see here, this arch which is formed is Corbelled Arch, not the true arch. You can see that each piece, each level of the bricks are protruding towards the inner side. You can find it here, giving it the form of an arch. What you could have done is that you could have had a slab or a brick continuing like this, but here a gap, staggering gap has been given, giving shape to an arch. So this type of an arch, which is encountered in India before the coming of the establishment of the Turkish Sultanate, generally speaking, or for example, we find a similar type of an arch at Harappa also, Mohenjo-daro or Harappa, probably at Harappa in one of the drains. But again, that is not a true arch, that is a corbelled arch, which was known in the Indian subcontinent since long. Unfortunately, I'm showing you this slide to show how, when the renovations were conducted in independent India, the ASI in fact renovated this particular Bhitargao temple without understanding the ethos, without understanding the culture during which this particular structure was built, without actually giving any credence to the technology which prevailed. When the renovation was done, a peculiar, typical arch was constructed instead. And now people get confused. And if you go to the textbooks, some of the textbooks looking at these reconstructed monuments would tell you, nahi, arch to maujood thi. In fact, what is the fact is that in all these structures, mostly it was the corbelling which was prevalent, which depicted the time. For example, here we come to one of the first monuments which was constructed after the establishment of the Delhi Sultanate in India. Now, with the establishment of the Delhi Sultanate, a new type of culture was, introduced into the Indian subcontinent. I don't know whether you have read the introduction to volume 2 of Eliot and Dowson by Professor Muhammad Habib. That has also been published independently now by the Center for Advanced Study. It is also part of the Eliot and Dowson volume 2, which has been published. Muhammad Habib's, and you will find it on the internet as well. Go through it. Muhammad Habib talks about the fact that after the coming of Islam in India, after the establishment of the Turkish Sultanate in India, two type of revolutions occurred. The first, the urban revolution, and then with the Khaljis, the rural revolution. What he's talking about is the fact that when these Turkish sultans came and established their sultanates, the artisanal classes, the people who till yet had been living in the villages, to cater to the needs of these new sultans, new ruling elite, the nobility, they started migrating towards the these urban centers, and slowly and gradually, not only the size of these urban centers started growing, but when they started living along with the new masters, they started imbibing the new culture and habits. And one of the results of the interaction between the local indigenous cultures and the one which had been brought into India by these conquests, new type of architecture, new type of buildings, new type of, everything started growing. And one of the finest example of how there was intermingling of both the cultures soon after the establishment of the Delhi Sultanate can be reflected through this monument before you. This monument, the sketch of the monument which is before you is that of Qubbatul Islam, which in a corrupt form is generally called as Quvvatul Islam. Quvvat means strength. People thought that because it was a conquest, so the mosque which they would have constructed should be known as Quvvat, the strength of Islam. In fact, this whole nomenclature was given by none other but Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, who misinterpreted the name Qubba with Quvvat. In the Sultanate sources, the term which occurs for this particular mosque is Qubbatul Islam, the dome of Islam, the center of Islam. You know very well that after the establishment of the Delhi Sultanate, one of the reasons for its establishment was the fact that Central Asian lands had been cut off by the Mongol invasions and depredations which were taking place. The regions from where these Ghurids and the Ghaznavids had come, that had been now been closed by the Mongol invasions, and these people could never return back, and they had to settle into the country with their own thoughts and religion and so on and so forth. And here they wanted to construct a new type of building which had generally not been known in India, the mosque, where the mosque was supposed to be not only a religious center, but one of the signs of imperial authority as far as the Islamic world was concerned. So orders were given to construct a mosque instead of a temple. The architects of this building were the Central Asians, who in fact told the people, the persons who were actually involved in the construction, what type of shape this new building should have. The local artisans, who were actually the builders, had never seen a mosque. They knew only the old technique. And that is why we find that here, what resulted in this mosque was a building of a new shape, a shape which was not known, but based on a technique which was known since ancient period in India, the trabeate and the corbelling. Naturally, the material which was used for the construction of this building was the local material which was available. In the recent few days, you must have heard that there is also a litigation going on, and someone has gone to the court that it was, a Jain and a Hindu temple. In fact, 26 or 27 temples which had been broken to give form to this particular building. If you go to this structure, you will find that there are many, pillars which actually belong to the temples, with the type of decorations which are generally found in the temples. The sources of the period, however, inform us, for example, Tabaqat-e Nasiri, that it was the material of 26 temples, old temples, had been used. They do not talk that these 26 temples were either broken or the material of the broken temples was used to reused in this particular type of construction. We know there is a work by Dr. Alka Patel, who is in one of the American universities. Her work in Rajasthan and Gujarat shows that there still exist a number of mosques as well, of the temples as well, which had earlier been mosques but later reconverted. Whether they were reconverted or the material of those buildings was used is a very open question. But what is established is the fact that old material was used, number one. Number two, the technique which went into its creation was the same technique which had once been used in the making of the temple structures. For example, here in this arch, central arch of the Qubbatul Islam Mosque, you can see that the arch which has been formed is an arch. It appears to be an arch, a pointed arch, in fact, but you know, it's having the form of a corbelled arch, not a true arch. You can see that each and every stone piece is, it is moving in this side. It is staggered. Ultimately, a layer of stone has been put all around it to give it a particular form. So it's not a true arch. And so what is happening? And then, of course, there are works which have been done which show that the masons who were involved in the construction of Qubbatul Islam, as well as the Qutub Minar, which you can see behind that, which is a Maizana tar. Maizana means the tar meant for a muazzin who gives the call for the prayer. So here it is not a Kirti Stambh. What the local masons knew was how to make a Kirti Stambh. We have a large number of examples from ancient period where Kirti Stambhs had been made. Here, what the Sultan had ordered to be made was a Maizana tar, and a freestanding independent tar from which the call for prayers had to be given. So this Quwwatul Islam Mosque was now having two, catering to two type of works, one as a Maizana and the other as the Kirti Stambh, symbolizing the power and authority of the Sultan who was ruling there. In order to further strengthen the power and authority, there was a pillar, iron pillar, which was located nearby, which was ordered to be placed in the center of the mosque. It is also being used as a palimpsest, as a monument through which imperial authority is being drawn. So the whole political atmosphere of the early Delhi Sultanate is reflected in this particular monument which is before you. As I said, that in this structure, all the masons, on these stone pieces, we have a large number of masons' marks and signatures. And there is a book by Professor Pushpa Prasad, who has noted down the Sanskrit and non-Persian inscriptions of the early Sultanate period. And according to her, and according to J.A. Page, who was one of the first to survey this area, this whole structure and Qutub Minar have a large number of masons' marks and signatures, and incidentally, none of them bears a Muslim name. All of them are local craftsmen who were well versed in the local forms of architecture. So they were creating things in a fashion which they already knew. Now look at the dome here, one of the domes which survives at the Quwwatul Islam Mosque. It's a conical dome. It's not a perfect, a dome which we start finding later on. It is also built in the same fashion, which is the corbelled form. Look here, that each, layer is protruding inwards. There are concentric circles, one circle smaller than the other one, placed on top of each other, and they rest on these temple pillars, which are, load bearing, and we find that the whole, corbelled system is being used to give form to domes which are conical. And then, of course, the structure all around this Quwwatul Islam Mosque has been given the requisite height by using the shafts of the older pillars of the temples which had once existed in this area. As I have already pointed out, no one is sure whether all these 27 temples had been broken down. Even if they were broken down, I would suggest, although there is no reference, that please go through the work of Richard Eaton, who first wrote an article on the temple destructions, a tradition which prevailed from ancient to medieval India. And also later on, he developed this article, which was initially published in one of the journals outside, but then also republished in two parts in Frontline. And both these things are now, if you Google search both these articles, whether of the Frontline or the Foreign Journal, I'm forgetting the name of the journal where it was published, both those articles are freely available on the net for you to download. At least the Frontline article is very much available. The other one, if you have access to JSTOR, you can also download the same. But here you can very well see that the ceilings are still the same trabeated old style ones, with the pillars holding these stones to their place. You remove these pillars and the ceiling would come down. So pillared structures which represent a particular technology which was known during that period. There are certain people who claim that mosques are large, big, high, open, airy, vaulted, beautiful, whereas the temples are low-lying, dark, shady, claustrophobic, pillared. Religion has nothing to do with any of these two facts. It is not that Islam is open, so you have open, high, domed mosques, or that Hinduism has something to hide or secretive, and that is why we have such garbures and such structures. No, it is the technology which represents these structures. It is the type of technology which dictated the culture and the ethos of that period, which is very well diffracted from these buildings. Now, this is one of the first tombs which was created in India after the establishment of the Delhi Sultanate. The tomb of Sultan Ghari. Ghar means cave. Sultan means the prince or the ruler. This is the tomb of Prince Muhammad, who was the son of a sultan. He died at a time when the sultan wanted him to succeed. And the sultan had this particular tomb. So Iltutmish, in fact, had this particular tomb built for his son. Now, look at the type of the shape. Square. Incidentally, remember that from this tomb onwards, which is the first tomb after the establishment of the Delhi Sultanate, down to the tomb of Safdarjung during the later Mughal period, which is supposed to be one of the last Mughal structures to be built, all the tombs, generally speaking, are circular, or some of them octagonal. I'll come to that later. This is the particular typical shape. But here, and then secondly, what they have in common from this tomb down to Safdarjung is that the grave is never constructed at the ground level. It is always underground in a subterraneous chamber. Now, because this was the first such building where the grave was located within a subterraneous chamber, it came to be known as Ghari, the Sultan Ghari, a place where the prince is sleeping underground. Right? Now, why this underground from the first tomb to the last? Now, this system of having underground graves and replicas on the top was due to the climate of the time. No one knew which dynasty or which ruler would replace whom and what would happen after their death. In order to safeguard the bones of the dead ruler, the body was in fact hidden in an underground chamber. They were never left open. Unfortunately, in spite of that, we know that during the 18th century, the Jats allegedly dug the grave of Akbar and had his bones burnt. This was an Abbasid tradition, and from the day one, this cultural tradition of the imperial authority safeguarding their dead remains by locating them inside a subterraneous chamber starts, taking shape from the first tomb down to the last. This particular building also has a number of other things. For example, the bastions. You can see the 3 bastions are visible to you here. These bastions, in fact, are again derived from military architecture of the Abbasid period. Again, a period when they thought that attacks might take place. So here during the period of Iltutmish, when so many Mongol invasions and so on and so forth were taking place, so this particular structure was built in the form of a small fortress. And then, of course, you may continue to find that the domes are still conical ones here. There you have a typical, cup-like shape, but the central dome is still the dome which is on the part of the place where the mosque is located. It is still pyramidal in form. Now, this tomb is also interesting because here there is no superstructure. In between, there should have been a building. There is only an underground chamber and a platform on the top. The actual grave is within this platform. On the top, you just have a square courtyard surrounded by, walls and chambers. On the four corners, the bastions. In the middle, you have an octagonal platform, and within that octagonal platform, you have the chamber which actually contains the grave of the prince. And on the top, there is nothing. So, if some invader comes, he would be confused, and there was perhaps a chance that the bones of the dead would remain intact even in case of an attack. Now, these, as I said, that these architectural, buildings give you much inkling about the past cultures and the past histories. Now, these two buildings are from the period of Akbar. I'm leaving everything of the Sultanate because my job is not to tell you about the history of architecture, but my job today is to show how these buildings become a source for the understanding of the past. Now, these buildings, both these, square buildings, which you find one near the other, in fact, joined to each other, if you pay attention, are just like in the Tughlaq character, having, a tapered wall, tapering. All of us know that, the tapering wall, cyclopean walls, is one of the characteristic features of the Tughlaq period. But few of these structures, early structures of Akbar's period, suggest to us that this tapering, although it might be slight, for example, here you can observe it is not much, but there is a slight tapering which you can find in the connecting wall here. One structure is a little higher than this one. You can see the height of this structure till here. The tapered wall of the other one ends here. So there are two independent structures with tapering walls. And such structures, a few of which survives at Fatehpur Sikri, tell us that till the early period of Akbar's reign, slight tapering, a tradition of the earlier period, survived. The artisans, the actual builders, the masons, they carried forward. Remember that the Tughlaqs, they were, declined after Feroz Shah, and soon we have the Sharqis in Jaunpur, and then you have, Vijayanagar Empire down in the Deccan, and in Sharqis, the same type of architecture as it was under the Tughlaqs, same tapering walls, same type of effects continued, and these effects, in fact, continued even up till the early period of Akbar, where you still find such structures where the slight tapering. And if you read E.W. Smith, his explanation of Akbari architecture, he also mentions that until the early phase of Akbar's reign, this small tapering remained. Unfortunately, without understanding the ethos of the period or the architecture, our official body, which is supposed to safeguard our built heritage, the Archaeological Survey of India, joined both these monuments together. You can see in this picture here. They thought that Chhajjas should be there. These eaves should be there, so they provided it eaves, and then they joined both the things, and they built the outer walls once again, rebuilt them, and gave them a straight shape. This was done by one of the gentlemen who is very well known in the field of archaeology, medieval archaeology. He claims to be a medieval archaeologist. I am talking about Mr. K.K. Muhammad. He has done much harm as far as the medieval Indian architecture is concerned. And one of the harms is before you, where without a proper understanding of the culture and ethos of Akbari period, of how these structures actually were, he started recreating them in the image which he himself found suitable. There are, if you read my book, I have given many more examples of how he tried to tailor these monuments. As I said, these monuments, in fact, tell you a story of the past, and we should never, just like in history, we should not, we are living in the 21st century, and we should abstain from reflecting back the 21st century, our ideologies and our thinking, our society to 16th and 17th centuries or to the ancient period. Same is the case with architecture. Our present beliefs have nothing to do with what was actually happening during the period when these structures were themselves created. So here we find that there is an attempt where, without understanding our past, without understanding the culture, the ASI also has been a culprit, where even the nature of the monuments are being tried to be changed and given the form which we believe they should have been. Another aspect which I would like to highlight before you is based on this particular building, which I don't think many of you would have actually seen. This is the one of the first Mughal monuments to be built in the Indian subcontinent. In fact, the first monument, extant monument. Not only extant, even among those who are no more extant, this is the first Mughal monument to be built in India. This is at Panipat. This is the mosque which today is known as Kabuli Bach Mosque, because the area where this was built was known as Kabuli Bagh area. Remember that Babur was coming to India from Kabul along with a large army comprising of Central Asians and Afghanis. He replaced the Lodis, who were also Afghanis. You know that Ibrahim Lodi was an Afghan, belonged to an Afghan dynasty, but he did not represent the whole of the Afghans in the subcontinent. The Soors and a number of other Afghan families were not part of the Lodi Empire at all. Babur, who came to India, was a Central Asian, but when he came to India, he was a ruler of Kabul, the Bad Shahi of Kabul, not of Central Asia, not of Samarkand. So he was having along with him, he had also married among the Afghanis, one of the tribes of Afghans, and that is why he was also known as one of the damads, the son-in-law of the Afghans. He came along with them. So in a way, there were a large number of Afghans who had accompanied him, and possibly because of the reason when after the Battle of Panipat, when in the form of thanksgiving, if you read Baburnama, Babur mentions that after he had defeated Ibrahim Lodi, and the place where Ibrahim Lodi is buried today is not very far from this Kabuli Bagh area or this mosque. Now, as a form of thanksgiving, Babur notes in his Baburnama, in his autobiography, that he ordered the construction of a Bagh, and within the Bagh, he constructed a mosque, and near the mosque, he constructed a step well, Bawli, a step well. And this was for thanksgiving for the public that he had won the Battle of Panipat and become the ruler of India. So this was the first mosque. And we know that Babur, when he came to India, was accompanied by two architects who were Central Asian and Iranian. In fact, the same architect who constructed this Kabuli Bagh Mosque, later on, his name was Ghiyasuddin, and later on he came to construct, during the reign of Akbar, the tomb of Humayun. So this tomb at this mosque at Panipat, the Kabuli Bach Mosque, is a Babri Masjid, the real actual Babri Masjid, and it was constructed by an architect who was Central Asian, Mirza Ghias, the same person who ultimately was responsible for the planning of Humayun's tomb. Now pay attention to this mosque. It is a mosque which has multiples of domes. I will show you, although you can see two small domes here. I don't know if you are able to see my cursor or not. They are flat two domes. The domes are still in the form which was there under the Lodi period. And then a central dome, and there is a high propylon, which is you will find among the Sharqis, you will find in Central Asia, in Samarkand, Bukhara, and other places. The central mihrab is always higher. So it is here. Sharqis also derived their architecture from the same traditions. The use of red sandstone, which by now under the Mughals, after the Temur, was the material through which the imperial buildings were to be made, and then a big, large dome on the top and mark on the top that instead of a kalasha, which was an Indian addition to the Indian mosques, what we have instead of a kalasha out here, we have a roshandan, where you can see these slits through which air and sunlight would fall inside the chamber. They are roshandans. So we find that here is a building just after the establishment of the founding of the Mughal Empire as such. Within a few days of conquest and defeat of Ibrahim Lodi and conquest of Babur, a structure is being created which has an amalgamation of Indian, the local traditions, as well as the Central Asian traditions. Why? Because, as I said, the architect is a Central Asian, and those who are building it, the local masons, they are those who are well tuned in the traditions of the region. Panipat is a region very close to Delhi. It's in Punjab, today in Haryana. And so what we have is the old Tughlaq traditions along with the Central Indian traditions, the Central Asian traditions. Both of them get amalgamated in this particular building, and a new style, a new mosque, the first Mughal mosque, is created using both the traditions. Now here you can see the mosque from the front. And as I said, you see that just like any of the Iranian and Central Asian mosques, there is a multiplicity of the domes. You find that this side is all broken. The roofs are gone, the domes are gone. But here you find that the layers of domes are there. There are at least 9 domes which embellish this particular mosque. The central chamber of the mosque is higher, and on that there is a larger dome which is closed by a roshandan on the top. In the front is a screen which is propylon, which is you would be reminded of the Sharqi architecture, the high propylons. But don't forget that by this time Babur is not aware about the Sharqis or their constructions. What is happening is that Sharqis also borrowed from the Central Asian traditions, and this mosque is being made in a typical Central Asian tradition by a Central Asian architect. The only thing is that he gives the orders, and the actual people who are creating this building are creating it in the same fashion as you can see these. I'm not going into the details, but typical Indian Sultanate type of arches which are there, which came into existence from the Tughlaq to the Lodi period. So the actual builders, they are trained in the Indian traditions. In fact, even in the plaster, these pilasters which are given on the top, the type of decorations on the gate and other places is also typically Tughlaq and Indian in form. Although the shape, the form with multiple domes and the Roshandan on the top represents this Kabuli Bach mosque as a Central Asian, cousin of the mosques which Babar had seen in Samarkand and Bukhara. Now, this tradition of having a kalash was not incorporated by the Mughals immediately. Now, for example, there is another example, this building, which is at Sarhandi in Punjab. All of you must have heard the name of Sarhandi. There was a very important Sufi saint of Sarhandi who became very important during the period of Jahangir, Shaykh Sarhandi. It's so not very far from this area is the tomb of Shaykh Sarhandi. And here there are two domes which are now in open fields. You can see the fields all around this tomb. They are today known as the tomb of Ustad and Shagird, the teacher and the student. This is the earlier one of these two, the tomb of Ustad, being constructed in the Punjab region, where generally the bricks in Multan, Bengal and Punjab, as I told you, throughout we have the use of bricks. So here again, typically the whole structure, instead of the stones, which became the hallmark of the Mughal period in Punjab and in Bengal, it is bricks. So here again, you have the brick construction, the square form, but then on the central dome, you find that instead of a kalasha, which is the hallmark of the Indian mosques, you have the Roshandan on the top. Possibly there in Kabuli Bagh, the Roshandan was on top of a mosque. Here is an example of a Roshandan, a Central Asian character in a tomb, which also possibly was made in a very early period. Also, although there are historians like Subhash Parihar who date this building a little later, but my reading of this is that this was one of the first tombs to be constructed, and possibly this tomb was constructed during the period of Humayun, as per my understanding of this particular building. And that is why we find that instead of a kalasha on the top of the Indian domes, here, although you can see that here the lotus motif is found in the earlier one, there is no lotus motif, it's all clear, just a Roshandan. But then here an Indian motif is added, the inverted lotus is added, but the Roshandan of Central Asia continues, giving us an inkling how both the cultures started interacting in the region of Punjab, or in the region which is represented by these monuments of the Punjab. In Bengal, as I said, the traditions which were there in Central Asia continued irrespective of what was happening in the Indogangita Basin. The same type of constructions with multiplicity of domes continued in North India. We have just a few mosques of the Tughlaq period where large number of domes are found in single monuments, but throughout the region of Bengal, most of these structures, although here you will find some embellishment of the stones on the top, ash layering of the stones, but the actual building is of bricks, and it is topped by small circular multiples of domes. In certain of these structures, the number of the domes may be as high as 80, or sometimes even more than that. For example, in Bada Sona and Chota Sona, there are a large number of domes which are made. In India, irrespective of these mosques, and secondly, one should remember that because of the climate in Bengal, the shape of the mosque is very different from the shape of the mosque in the Indo-Gangetic Basin. In the Indo-Gangetic Basin, you have a mosque which has a centrally located courtyard with a prayer chamber on the western side. And gateways on all these four sides. And within the courtyard, you have, an ablution tank. This was the Chahar Evan Mosque of the Iranian tradition, which was incorporated. But in regions of Bengal, today, West Bengal, the place where you are living, as well as in Bangladesh, the mosques do not have an all-encompassing courtyard. They are constructed in between, in the middle of open grounds, all right, but there is no cloister or anything surrounded courtyard at all, because the climate of this place dictates that there should be a prayer chamber which is large and covered. So that is why in most of the mosques, the architecture of the mosque, you have covered, pillared halls with multiple of domes. Now, in North India, we have a new type of a mosque which starts emerging as far as the Indian subcontinent is concerned. I call it as a Templar mosque. Why do I call it as a Templar mosque? I call it a Templar mosque because, there are certain features which are derived from the Indian traditions, the Indian social ethos. We know that the Indian society believes in hierarchy, hierarchical gradations. Nothing is at a common level. You have the Shudras, then you have the Vaishyas, then you have the Kshatriyas, and then you have the highest class, the Brahmins. Secondly, in Indian tradition, there is the concept of Trinity. Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh, the Trinity of Godhood. I give you a statement and you please go and ask your men. When I talk of Templar mosques, there are many people who criticize me for that. But I ask you to go and ask any of those who challenge this view to show you one single example of a mosque outside the Indian subcontinent. By Indian subcontinent, I mean, you understand, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, India, largely speaking, all this territory. In fact, even beyond, till Hindu Kush, you can say, that whole area. Show me one typical example where you find a mosque which has gradations, stepped, with steps leading to the courtyard, from the courtyard steps leading to the veranda or the central chamber, and then within the central chamber, the prayer chamber, the central portion of the mosque, the aisle where the imam stands for the prayers with the mihrab, higher, the other two portions having a lower roof surmounted by 3 domes. You will, throughout Central Asia and Iran, you will find mosques which are either single domed or with multiplicity of domes. For example, I just showed you, I didn't show you the Sultanate period mosque for example, Begumpuri Mosque, or for that matter, all the mosques which are there in Bengal, go and observe them, which were made in the medieval period with small, domes, circular domes, multiples of them. But at least from the Mughal period onwards, even in the Quwwatul Islam Mosque, there were a number of domes, now disappeared. But from the Mughal period, say from the mosque of the Jama Masjid of Fatehpur Sikri, the Jama Masjid of Delhi, the Bad Shahi Mosque at Lahore, which was constructed by Aurangzeb, and the slide before you is of Bad Shahi Mosque at Lahore, which is the grandest mosques of all. I mean, I am showing you this slide due to mere fact that it is generally believed that under Aurangzeb, architecture could not develop and there was a decline in architecture. Mark it, the most beautiful mosque built under the Mughals is this mosque, the Bad Shahi Mosque at, Lahore. 4 pillars. One thing which I would like to tell, although it is not related here, is that pillars in the North Indian mosques, Mughal mosques, or for that matter in the Sultanate mosques, although you find in Gujarat and certain other places, but in North India, the heart of the Mughal Empire, it is only from the period of Shah Jahan that we start getting the pillars. The first mosque with pillars under the Mughals is the Mosque of Jahanara or the Jama Masjid at Agra, stunted small pillars. Then at Delhi, 2 large pillars. And then you have this Bad Shahi Mosque at Lahore. Under Aurangzeb, you have 4 slender pillars. You go and look at the Aurangzeb's mosque at Banaras, slender pillars. You go and look at the Aurangzeb's mosque at Mathura, slender pillars. So we find that it is from Shah Jahan's period that this minaret concept was added to the mosque. But all these mosques, whatever I have named, have triple domes, 3 domes. The central dome, as you can see here, bigger, larger, higher, and on it is flanked by 2 other domes which are lower and smaller in size, signifying the Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh, the order of Trinity. Now look at this image of the Bad Shahi Mosque. Look at how beautiful it is. Once again, the minarets are repeated on the corners. You find the high propylon. You find the use of red sandstone. You find the use of the domes, which are of marble. They are bulbous domes, reminding you of the dome of the Taj Mahal. Agar sif, if I just remove one of the central domes and show you, you will confuse it with the dome of the Qutub Minar, which is supposed to be one of the most perfect domes around. And on the top, you have another Indian, Kalasha motif, which is, in brass or gold polished. And this whole, structure, as you can see from here, there are a large number of steps which you climb and come to this centrally located courtyard. In middle, there is a hause. But then when you go to the prayer chamber, there's again a series of steps which leads up to that. And then if you can mark here, the central portion of the chamber is higher than the flanking 2 sides, the aisles of the prayer chamber. Look at the whole construction. You see how this mosque has been created in steps. The outside, you climb a number of series of steps to come to the courtyard. From the courtyard, 3 or 4 steps to lead you inside the chamber, the central chamber, higher with a larger dome. And this is all, a typical Templar mosque which came to exist in India, which signifies the Ganga Jamni Tehzeeb, the coming together of the two cultures in the making of the religious building of the community which was ruling over the dynasty. Now, another aspect which I would like to, I know that I have taken enough of your time, but these, as I said, that these, architectural feat structures also include a large, not only buildings, but also, dams and bridges. I would just point out that the bridges also tell us much about the technology and the ethos of the period. Now pay attention. Here is a Mughal bridge before you. This is a bridge which again is today in on the near, you can say it is on the road to Chandigarh from Delhi. It is built during the period of Akbar. Now pay attention that these columns on which the whole bridge is raised is almost of the same breadth as the span of the arch. So if the breadth of the river is 10 meters, then at least 5 meters has been covered by these basins, forcing the water to take a different route altogether. Look here, that the river is here now, but this bridge continues because originally the river was flowing here, but slowly, because 50% blockade occurred, so the river changed its route and you had to build the bridge further so that you cover the area of the river once again. The bridge of Munim Khana, which is the grandest of all the Mughal bridges which survive from the period of Akbar. The bridge of Munim Khana at Jaunpur. The span of the arch is of equal size as the breadth of the basin which sustains the bridge. This was a typical defect of knowledge, how much weight should be given to hold the bridge in the water. This was, in fact, a tactical defect of all the medieval bridges, and then on the top you have, these kiosks in which, bazaars were, there is a similar, bridge in Iran, in Safavid Iran, but and it's much more beautiful, but mark it that it was built as a copy of this Akbari bridge, which is known as Munim Khana's bridge at Jaunpur. The Safavid version was made as a copy of this bridge. It was the Iranians who followed this method from us. And here, on the top of it, it was not only carrying the road, but also a whole market was constructed there. It was a site. Look at some of the European bridges, for example. Now look at the span of the arch and the basin. The basin is much reduced. The span of the arch is much more, allowing a proper flow of water. Again, another example. This is how, technology started developing, which was lacking as far as Mughal, architects were concerned. Another aspect which I would like to highlight, what type of information one could gather from the structures which survive. This is a slide of the Hathi Pole area from Fatehpur Sikri, a place where I have worked. I'll come back to this slide, just absorb it in your minds. It is on the top of a hill, the ridge of Fatehpur Sikri, so there is a tapering road, a road leading to that, but on the sides, you have at various levels, you can see, a well here, and then certain structures out here, these, and then the top of the palace. The actual level of the palace is somewhere here. So from the lower the lake side up to the level of the palaces, there is a climb which one has to rise, and these structures, as you can see, are built at different levels. Look here. This is the technology of how the water from the level of the lake was transported and collected to the top of the palace to run the fountains and fill to fulfill the needs of the water within the palatial complex. Here, this is the area of the lake now dried. On the ground, you have this Bavli, the step well. You can see the octagonal well. You can see these chambers surmounted with platforms. Within these chambers, you have big chambers which are located there, where possibly Persian wheels rotated. The animals or human labor rotated the Persian wheel, which was placed here at the center of this. And from there, the water through this aqueduct was carried to an artificial well. Here you can see this artificial well with again two chambers on the sides, with again cutlasses and machines to rotate the wheel, Persian wheel, which was placed here, and through that the water came here, and from here it flowed to the other level. Here you can see again the side of the second well, and the chambers here, and the let again through the same process. There is a painting of this whole, look at this at different levels. With what you see here is the octagonal Bavli, the step well, and how there are various stages which are built to carry the water on the top. And this whole process has been explained in this particular Mughal miniature, which is there in Victoria Albert Museum, which is part of the Akbarnama. Here you see these Persian wheels at various levels. At least two levels are visible. This is the Hathi pole, and you can see how through these levels, this was the central waterworks through which the water could be carried up till the top level. To end the talk, let me say that these are some of the facts which we can collect if we pay attention to our buildings. The buildings are, in fact, can be treated as our source for the understanding of the past cultures. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for such an amazing and informative lecture. Hopefully, our audiences have gathered intrinsic knowledge from the same, and we came to know a lot about this architecture and how it is related, how it is a very important part of history, and about the bridges and all. So now our respected audiences can ask question to sir, and sir will be answering the questions one by one. The questions, please. Okay. So Somita Majumdar is asking, could you please tell us if any manuscript paintings exist which show the process of building the structures? Is there any graphic representation of the process of building medieval structures?
In fact, Somrit, I'll tell you that there are not one but multiples of Mughal miniatures which show the process of making of a building. For example, there is a pair of buildings which show us how the construction of Agra fort is taking place. We have a series of paintings which show how Fatehpur Sikri is being constructed. We have a series of paintings which show other monuments and structures being built. Each and every process, I'm sorry I didn't bring that particular slide with you, but if you look at, and some of them are part of the Akbarnama itself, the official account or history of Akbar's reign. Now, for example, in a number of paintings, what we see is that how the Mughal masons are making the mortar, how the carvings are being done, how the carved stones are being lifted through the ramps and altars which have been made to the top. Another aspect which is highlighted in these buildings is you can make out the social stratification of the labor which is working there. For example, some of them would be shown barefooted. There are certain who are having turbans on their head. Even their clothing style would tell you about the status. And remarkably, at least in two paintings, even today, if you go to a construction site, you will find that there would be these peddlers, for example, peanut sellers or some other such sellers of tidbits, and the peasant would be buying stuff from them. You go to any site and you would find that is depicted in these paintings. No source tells us about whether there was child and women labor or not. The painting tells you that child labor was also there. The women were also working. So, there are a large number of, the whole history, and I would recommend at the moment that, this is self-promotion as well, go through my book, Fatehpur Sikri Revisited. My interpretation of the whole town is based on a large number of Mughal miniatures which survive. So, to answer you in short, that there are number of miniatures which tell us a lot about the building process which was happening there. And I would also recommend that please go through my sectional presidential address of 2014 JNU Indian History Congress, Medieval India, where I have discussed these materials. That's available online.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much. Okay. Nayak Ganguly, on different note, acha, I would like to know from Professor Rezavi the right tomb of Bahlol Lodi. Is it in the Shesh Gambot in Lodi Gardens or the one in Chiragi, Delhi?
Unfortunately, there are opinions and opinions. Because there is hardly any inscription, epigraph, it's very hard to say, but certain people when they read the sources, some point, for example, take the tomb of Razia Sultan, certain sources hint that it was not at Delhi that she was buried. The others swear by the fact that no, the tomb which they have identified in Delhi is the one. So actually, it is very difficult to say which is the real tomb of Behlul Lodi. Both of these tombs which you refer have been attributed to Behlul Lodi. Both belong to that period, and makes no difference which one of it is the actual one. You may believe whatever you have to.
Okay. Let's see the next question. Pritam Das, how far do you think the fort building technique changed with the arrival of Islam in the Indian subcontinent?
Oh, it changed a lot. It changed a lot. I said because the coming of Islam, I would not go with that term. Islam came to India even during the period of the Prophet. There is a mosque in Kerala which belongs to that period. We know that
Yes.
even before the Turkish conquest, during the period of the Pals and Pratihars, there were mosques in the Bihar and central Indian regions. in eastern regions. We know that there were settlements in the region of Ajmer, so on and so forth. So I won't say that coming of the establishment of the Sultanate as the coming of Islam. What I would say is the coming of the Turks to India. Remember that even the sources, the primary sources of the period, they do not talk in this Hindu-Muslim language at all. They don't say the Muslims attacked India. They say it was the Turushkas who came to India. So let us stick with this term. As I said, that the beginnings of this conquest by those who were not living within the subcontinent. We are talking about a time when there was no nationality, so we can't say that foreigners and Indians. Even if you had been living during that period, you would not have been an Indian. Even today, when I ask you what is your watan, you will not say that it is my watan is India. You would say my watan is Bengal, or you would name the place, the native place where you actually belong to. So even today, we are not very well versed with this idea of watan and nation. Even when Sir Syed was talking about Qawm, it had a different connotation. So let us leave these terms behind, because in history, these terms carry no meaning. There was a particular type of ethnic group which entered into the subcontinent. It entered into the subcontinent between 8th to 10th centuries in the region, which is the region of Multan, the northwest frontier, and there a new type of a technology came to be established. This particular ethnic group, which incidentally had a predominant religion of Islam as well, came to establish itself during the 13th century, 1206, and thus we find that the first structure to be constructed in India after the Turkish conquest is the structure which I showed you, the Quwwatul Islam Mosque. Right. So 8th, 10th centuries in northwest region, the upper portions of Punjab and Multan, and the 13th century onwards, as far as the Indo-Gangetic region is concerned. In Kerala, the timings would be different. In Bengal, along with the Turkish conquest, we know that the sultanates came to be established. So we can safely say that till the eastern parts, it was the 13th century. When these new ethnic groups came, they came along with a entirely new technology. Entirely new technology. I would refer you to the work of one of the very well-known archaeologists who also took up the excavations of the Ayodhya Mosque. B.R. Mani. B.R. Mani was the person who in 2013 started excavations at the Ayodhya site. Now, he had, before taking up these excavations, also written a book on Delhi. Delhi, its threshold. It's a very important book, not very thick, and I would recommend that you go through it. And he tried to prove in this book that the moment we see the introduction of lime mortar is the period when we say that the Rajput period is over and the Delhi Sultanate has been established. In other words, technology marks the coming and going of different cultures. I would recommend to you a number of series of papers which have been written by Professor Irfan Habib on, building technology, which contains information on building technology. And there are three things which all these researchers point out, which were introduced in India with the coming of the new culture, with the coming of the new ethnic groups. One, the lime mortar. Though it was known in India, but it was not very popular. Here and there we find use of lime mortar. It was not entirely, absent. We do have one or two examples, but at a popular level, it started, being used only 10th century onwards in the central in the northwest frontier Punjab Multan region, and from 13th century onwards in the region which is known as Indogangita Basin. Along with that, the second import or new technology which came was the bricks, burnt bricks. Burnt bricks, is known also during the Harappan period. Nothing new. But
Yes.
once again,
Yes.
most of the buildings which started being made, because now lime mortar made it possible to make structures which are more durable. You can make
Hmm.
structure, as I showed you in the slide, that heavy stones can be joined together by clamps, or a typical type of a method where you have groove and this thing, you join them together without the use of any lime mortar. But for the bricks, you need a new type of adhesive. And that is why we find that along with bricks, and now it is a question whether the egg came first or the hen came first, I don't know. But the fact is that lime mortar and the big bricks, they start appearing together. And so we have, along with lime mortar, with the bricks, when both these things became available, now you could have not corbelled structures, but you could have true arches, where all those pieces of stones could be held together by smaller mediums, because the if you have small bricks, you can give it any shape, any form, and by the lime mortar you can join them successfully together, and it would become as a concrete without the concrete being known. So these three things occurred. In the Quwwatul Islam Mosque, as I told you, the first initial beginnings of the Delhi Sultanate, we still have the old uh, corbelled trabeate method which continues. It is only from the period of the Khaljis, and during the period of the Khaljis, we find that there is also a Sanskrit text where one of the Hindu in charges of the mint of Alauddin Khilji, I am Thakur Peru. Thakur Peru has a full, a series of books which he has written in Sanskrit. I'm forgetting the name of the particular book, in which there are a number of chapters on architecture. And for the first time, and he is, in fact, a minister under Alauddin Khilji. We generally say that Hindus were recruited in bureaucracy and service from the Akbar's period onwards. It's totally incorrect. It is from the early period that we start finding. For example, under Alauddin Khilji, there is a person, Thakur Peru, writing works in Sanskrit, and because of his works, we know that he was the in charge of the Delhi Mint. And in this work, he refers to Gumbat, he refers to the true arch, he refers to the dry mortar. No Sanskrit word for these, technologies have been used. The Persian words have been given by Thakur Peru. And from that is why from Alauddin's period, now his, mosque at Hazrat Azamuddin, it is a totally arcuated mosque, so on and so forth. At Alai Darwaza, at Quwwatul Islam Mosque, belonging to Alauddin Khilji's period, that's a arcuated structure, so on and so forth. So we know that this new technology which came into existence slowly and gradually was taken up by the Indian architects and masons and became their own. But still, the older traditions, for example, till date, I don't know about whether it is that term is used in Bengal or not, but here in North India, we still say ungal or angul. The shape or the size of a finger. That is
Hmm.
measurement which is given in the old Vedic texts. So old traditions coupled with the new traditions. This is how transformations take place. Remember one thing: architecture has no religion at all. It is we who give them, religious sense.
Hmm.
Chain and bell motif might have been part of, temple architecture once upon a time, but from Gujarat Sultanate onwards, it became a part of the mosque architecture as well. And by the time that Akbar built his Fatehpur Sikri, the chain and bell motif had lost its meaning as a feature of the temple architecture, and was used in the palaces of Fatehpur Sikri itself. So let us remember that there were, coming of new technologies, and those technologies were very profound. And one very profound change which took place was that with the introduction of lime mortar, with the introduction of small bricks, and with the introduction of the erected style, people like you and me also started building our own houses. Remember that in the ancient period, it is mainly the palatial complexes and the religious structures which were built. You and me kept on living in wooden structures or mud structures. But the common man, from the period these new technologies came, now they could afford a lime mortar could be prepared on your own field as well. कुछ नहीं करना था. A furnace, bring those blocks of lime, boil them, you get the lime mortar. You make a furnace, take out clay from your own soil, the brick is formed. You need not import any of the material. So both the binding material and the brick could be prepared at a very low cost. The raw material would come from your own land itself, not from anywhere else. And you could then build your own structure. You can have any type of roofing which you want. And if you had money, then you could also embellish it with stones. But otherwise, the brick structures would come to stay, and people like you and me. So the technology also opened up the field of building construction to the common people, which had not been the case earlier.
Okay, sir. Do we have any more questions? Yes. So Samhita Sen, can you please explain how far the decorative motifs on the edifices are important as tales of history? Okay. This is the question.
Well, it's a very good question, and um, I would answer it in, there is a historian of architecture, uh, Professor Abakosh, uh, who has also, published that illustrated Bad Nama for us, which is now available. She thinks that, miniatures, whether on the book or on the surface of the structures, they are after all paintings. And paintings are made by artists. For example, poetry is written by poets. And there is always a poetic license. So you can write whatever you have to write. For example, go to Fatehpur Sikri or go to Delhi Fort, and you will find structures which are not very high. But if you read the verses of the poets of Shah Jahan's period, they would tell you that the buildings constructed were such that they were, reaching the heavens. They were not even reaching the floor on which I am living. What to talk about heaven? But the poetic license is there. So similarly, the artist also. I mean, there has been an argument that it is the artist is making an image which may not necessarily be the truth. It is out of his own imagination that he is building something. He has the license of an artist. So whatever has been made on the building, whatever scene has been depicted there, or for that matter, in the illustrated in a book, is not illustrative of the actual things. But having worked on this thing for quite some time, I can assure you that you should not forget that any artist would only depict what he has actually seen. If I ask you, Srijapal, that please draw me a gun. Now, what type of gun would you draw? You would draw the same type of gun which you would have seen it.
Mhm.
If I ask you to make a
Exactly.
painting of a street with cars running on it,
Hmm.
taxi running on it, in Kolkata, the child would generally
Hmm.
be trying to show the ambassador car, the same shape, because he's seen that. But a
Yes.
child sitting in Bombay is not
Yes.
aware about how the ambassador car is. He will make it in the form of a Fiat. Hmm. An artist
Hmm.
may be taking his license, exceeding it, exaggerating it, but he would be depicting only what he has seen himself through his eyes. What my contention is
Hmm.
that these surface decorations and paintings are a very good source of information of what actually was the scene during the period when the artist was making it. Some of the paintings which have been made illustrating Fatehpur Sikri contained in the Victoria Albert Museum Akbarname does not belong to the
Hmm.
period when Akbar was living at Fatehpur Sikri. Akbar abandoned Fatehpur Sikri in 1580, and these paintings illustrations were being done in 1595 by an artist uh, at Lahore. But he still uh, is making those, you know. Uh, so it's not a photographic evidence, but he remembers what he has seen and he draws out of it through memory. Now, there is a painting which I have used in one of my articles of a scene from a garden setting with Noor Jahan entertaining Jahangir. There is a river which is flowing behind that. Tuzuke Jahangiri informs us that uh, uh, Noor Jahan had constructed a garden at the river bank at Agra, which was known as Bagh-e Noor Afshan, where she used to entertain the emperor. So here is a scene where emperor is being entertained in a garden setting with a river flowing behind it. Now, in the pavilion where the royal couple is sitting with other people all around them, there are a number of paintings which have been illustrated by the artist on the walls of the pavilion. It's an artist's imagination of the pavilion where, Noor Jahan is entertaining Jahangir. Right. Now, one of the things which is depicted in this particular painting are two images which attracted my attention. One, that of Jesus Christ, a man with a beard, the typical form of Jesus, which is drawn in Western circles. So he's there on the top, on one side, and on the other, there is a white veiled, red robed woman, typical of Mother Mary, which is there in this painting. Then other scenes are there. Now, when I went to this particular garden, which is identified as Bagh Noor Afshan at Agra, now today it is known as Aram Bagh. It is erroneously or whatever thought to be the garden where Babar was once buried. It has a large number of paintings which still survive in the interiors of the pavilion, which are typically Jahangiri in character. Uh, Themes which are derived from Christian, themes, biblical,
Hmm.
which are there. Now, at the particular spot
Yes.
where this drawing might have been made, because they outside of this pavilion, from where you can see the river flowing, there are two taks which are
Hmm.
given there, closed windows. And we thought, okay, let us check whether there is something behind that or not. At the time when I went there, it was all lime plastering which had been done on that. When we threw some water on that and the lime water on the top became a little revealing, we found that within that there were two paintings on two talks, one of Jesus, one of Mary. Later on, the ASI scrapped off those, um, uh, British period lime mortar coverings, and the two images were revealed. One of an old man, bearded man sitting like Jesus, and the other of a veiled woman just like Mary. Now keep these my photographs and keep this painting, Mughal painting done during Jahangir's period, side by side, and you would realize that they are replica of each other. Secondly, there are a number
Wow,
of
that's interesting.
things which I was able to identify at Fatehpur Sikri based on certain of the miniatures which exist today in Victoria Albert Museum. In short, my answer would be that although these miniature paintings, whether illustrated in the form of book or given on the walls, they are not photographs. There are variances. There are variances because they are not actual representations, but they are after
Mhm.
something which was actually there. So they are not photographic, but illustrative enough of what the fact would have been. So we historians have been using the illustrations within the books, the miniatures, as well as paintings made on these particular monuments, and both can be used to interpret the history of these monuments and places.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so here we end. Thank you so much, sir, for giving your time and accepting our request. I, on behalf of the team, is grateful to you and to our audiences for staying for such a long time. Uh, Please like our page and share the updates, whatever is coming. Thank you. Good night.